this window to disappear. There we go. All right, I'm going to start with this and I'm going to share this. Okay, so hopefully you all can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on talking about 3 projects that were more data-driven than some of my other work. But before I get to the first project, I felt like I had to show this one as a slight introduction. So I did this portrait series back in 2010, where I guess backing up a little bit from 2010, one thing that I think is important to know going into this is, so Facebook, you know, I'm sure we're all familiar with it, became, you know, kind of kept growing and growing from 2004, 2005, kept growing. By 2009, Facebook has like 30 million, you know, people involved and, you know, keeps growing. From the very beginning, I'm like super anti-Facebook. I like hate it. I don't like, you know, I didn't like anything about it. But it did lead me a little bit to make this project where I wanted to create a portrait in a way of myself by photographing all the people that I sort of considered friends, or I considered that if you looked at this series of portraits of 84 people, that you would get an idea of who I was. So it's probably really small on the bottom, but they all have like a figure number and it's got their name, the year they were born, you know, who, you know, when I met them, what they do for a living and where they live. So in doing this series, you know, I had come up with a list of, you know, it was a little hard to come up with the list of people because it's like, okay, well, who's an acquaintance and who's a person that, you know, I feel informs you about who I am. So it was kind of an interesting exercise. You know, they ranged from, you know, family to friends and so forth. And one of the people who, you know, I just kind of made a big list of people and I would send an email saying, oh, I'm doing this series. And, you know, a lot of people weren't based in Los Angeles. So I had to travel to different parts of the country. And one of the people on the list was a friend of mine from graduate school named Matt Winthrop. And, you know, throughout the year, I was scheduling different things and I hadn't heard back from him. And then I read in the University of Miami, like monthly, I don't know, publication where they, you know, talk about, you know, whatever, their little monthly magazine. I saw that he had passed away. And I wasn't really expecting that. So coming out of this project, it led me to do this project. So this was the first project that I did where I was sort of actively collecting information. So I created this website, which actually just took over my own website for a period of a few months. And I was looking for people, anybody who had known him, to record a specific story about him. And then I was going to take those stories and send them to a friend of mine who lived in London with a concert ticket to see the band Spiritualized. Because we had, you know, when I was friends with Matt, you know, he liked music a lot. And you know, we had both talked about sort of our you know, love of this band. You know, I thought it would be an interesting idea for this person who didn't know him to listen to these stories about him and go sort of experience the concert for him. So you would come to the website and there was an audio recorder built, you know, directly in here, which since I just have screenshots of it because this website doesn't exist anymore, you can imagine what it did. So then I sent, this letter to this friend of mine in London with the concert ticket, and I gave her these instructions. I had absolutely no idea like what the end result of this project was going to be. It was a lot about that idea of giving him this experience. And so she did all the things on my list. She listened to the stories. She photographed while she was there. She recorded the concert as I asked. She sent me the concert ticket back. This was the concert ticket that I sent her. So then I took the stories about him, and I created this 5-channel audio piece that were built into these little boxes that looked like they had stars. And out of the 5 channels, you would hear the different stories. They would overlap a little bit, but you could stand there and listen and hear some of what she heard before she went to the show. And then on the other side of the room, there was this video, which was the whole length of the concert. And for most of the time, it's this sort of star field, and there's a waveform. And eventually, his silhouette sort of comes into focus. I'm not sure. I'll just play like a little clip of it. And I'm not sure if you can hear it. It doesn't really matter. So you can see, you can't really see him. And I'll skip forward. So then his silhouette kind of comes up there, which looks like, and then disappears. So in the installation, you would be hearing the recorded stories at the same time you'd be hearing the concert. So you're kind of getting both experiences at the same time. This is just a segue into the next project, but the project that I did right after that, which I think informs the next one, is this, which was called You Cannot Be Replaced, which is a 2-channel video where I contacted all of the current and former members of the band, The Polyphonic Spree, and I went and photographed them. And, I wanted the viewer to really think about, it's, if you're not familiar with the band, they're kind of an unusual band in the sense that there's usually about 20 people on stage, and they wear these robes, which you can see in these pictures. So they're like a little weird cult-like in a way. And
Elizabeth is, did you photograph a woman named Ariel?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah, one of my friends is in polyphonics. So
okay.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. This is cool.
So, a lot of times when you go and see them, you don't necessarily specifically remember what some of the people look like, and they're all wearing the robes. So there was sort of an interesting exploration into identity that I wanted to explore in doing this. So I represented the instruments, and then I showed all the people that played those instruments. So in this 5.5-minute video, these people kind of come up each one at a time, and then they fade away into a person that you can't really see but wearing the robe. So this project caused me to use Facebook because I didn't know the band. And I was trying to contact and get in touch with all these people that I have absolutely no connection with. Really, the only way to do it was Facebook. So as it pained me to create a Facebook account, I sort of set these rules up for myself that the only people my Facebook account will be connected with are the Polyphonic Spree. But that's important going into my next sort of data-driven project, which is the Real Brian Wilson, which I'm just going to reload this browser. So the Real Brian Wilson, I created this website where I was looking for people named Brian Wilson to fill out a survey, which is on the next page, which I'll go to in a second. And I, again, had to use Facebook to try to find these people because, you know, I don't know anyone named Brian Wilson. I mean, I know there's famous people named Brian Wilson, but, you know, I didn't personally know anyone named Brian Wilson. So I wanted to just create a Facebook page that was just kind of about the project and, you know, trying to be able to reach out and connect to people on Facebook. But you can't do that. You have to have a personal page first, then to make a page like that. So I made a Facebook account for Brian Wilson and then connected this to it. So if you click to get on the next page, this was like the information I was trying to get from people. And again, going into this project, I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do with this information, but I was just, after doing the polyphonic spree project and really thinking about identity, I was just really interested in, you know, what is it like for somebody who shares a name with Brian Wilson, the musician that we all know. And kind of what triggered me to make this project was there was a pitcher for the San Francisco Giants who was named Brian Wilson. And he had, you know, like a big beard, like, you know, somewhat similar to kind of the Brian Wilson that we're familiar with from the Beach Boys. And I remember thinking, oh, that's so funny that this guy named Brian Wilson, who's also, you know, somewhat famous, is, you know, just kind of going with that as his name. And he hasn't, like, you know, thrown in, I don't know, a middle name or hasn't altered his name in somewhat, that he was kind of owning his name. So I created a Twitter account and I would release these kind of blurry pictures, you know, every day or so, you know, just trying to find anybody named Brian Wilson to come and fill out my survey. The same thing on Facebook. I would just friend anybody named Brian Wilson, again, just trying to get them to come to my website. So through that process, and I, you know, again, I had no idea what was going to happen. I think the first response I got was a truck driver from Scotland who, you know, answered all the questions. He was, you know, he thoroughly answered all the questions, which was great. I was, you know, I hadn't even thought of that. Like, oh yeah, there's Brian Wilsons anywhere in the world. So I ended up getting responses from people from Australia, South Africa, Norway. Then I got a response from Brian Wilson in Northern Ireland, who was a young guy and he was a writer. So then I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to have this project authored not only by myself, but also by Brian Wilson? So I asked the writer if he would write a short script with me based on, and some of it, you know, was his writing and some of it would be, I would take the responses from the survey and try to work them into a narrative. One of the other Brian Wilsons that answered the survey was from the Republic of Ireland. He was a graphic designer. So I asked him to create this movie poster for the 2-channel video, which again, I was just really excited about having the Brian Wilsons be more part of the project. So one screen is this, it's this lone Brian Wilson sort of questioning identity to some degree. He has a radio broadcast, and one day on his radio broadcast, when it's kind of like a pirate radio broadcast, he's tuning in and he comes across this annual Brian Wilson meeting, which is transmitting. So this was the part that I wrote, which was using the stories that people had sent me in the survey. So the, fictitious part of the narrative is there's this annual Brian Wilson meeting where people named Brian Wilson get together every year and they kind of talk about the impact of the name, or, how their year has been based on, living under this, realm of the famous Brian Wilson. So I presented this as a 2-channel video with these artifacts, which is this floating shelf here on the side. Early in on the project, I was in Florida, and there was a big headline about this guy named Brian Wilson who had killed his girlfriend. So I created this newspaper with that story in it. And it's a prop that we use in the film, because this is kind of one of the things that comes up that year that they're talking about, oh, this guy killed his girlfriend. And this was another thing kind of bringing down the Brian Wilson name. And then I showed the website, which was in this little screen here. And then these 2 little screens in the center were a series of letters between me and the Irish Brian Wilson that I wrote the script with. And I'll show you just a little clip of the video.
I can't take it anymore. I'm 37 years old. I'm ready to change my name. He's Brian Wilson. It's his name, not mine. I reviewed my LinkedIn profile about 6 months ago. I found out I have a lot of namesakes. That's how I found out about this meeting. I wonder how many of you have all had to feign interest with someone's remark about the Beach Boys. I know you talked about it. It's happened to all of us, right? I can't take it anymore. I don't want to be him anymore. Hey, listen, Brian, I hear you, man, but you need to own it. It's your name.
So anyway, you get the gist of it. And I guess one other thing to mention is this actor right here, who's kind of the, he's sort of hosting the meeting. He is an actor and his name is Brian Wilson. So it was kind of my other actual Brian Wilson that was part of the project. So then after I did that, a few other projects came up. But the next one that sort of fell into the realm of me creating a website and trying to gather information, which seems to be something that I like to do, is this one called Collective Distance. So Collective Distance, this project came about in the summer of 2020. There was an organization in Malta that was looking for people to do residency projects that they could do remotely. So I came up with this idea, since we all felt so trapped in 2020 and we couldn't go anywhere or do anything. I wanted to create a short film in the road movie genre that would use stories that people provided based on their experience during the pandemic. So on the website, each one of these things bring you to like a different sort of question that you could answer. And in addition to the specific questions here, the organization was really interested in providing the survey to people physically there in Malta. people who maybe weren't, internet people, the older generation. So they distributed this questionnaire. The same questions on the website are the same questions here. And then they scanned them in, and they sent me, a good number of ones that they had gotten during their reach out. So this project, kind of unlike the previous two, I did know where it was going. I knew I was going to be making a short film. I knew I was going to be sort of taking, these bits and pieces of information and somehow trying to weave it into a project that, that did allow one to leave their space. And that's why I wanted to do the something in the road movie genre. So it's just an example of the website. I also created an Instagram account, again, just trying to connect with people, letting the organization connect with who they could connect with, and then just wanting to connect with other people that maybe didn't know about the organization. But these were all centered on people living in Malta, which I really knew nothing about because I've never been there. So then from that, I created this 9-minute short film, which is here. And this is just a clip of it. And it just really explores time. So it's kind of interesting. You guys were talking about time in the beginning of this meeting. And just how I think the impact of the pandemic felt like it was never ending. But in this film I made, it sort of explores one's kind of, not purpose, but where one falls within the universe, and that this time frame of 2020 and 2021 is just really so brief in the sense of humanity and Earth and so forth. So I'll just play a little clip of this.
I always thought of time as a linear object, everything moving in a straight line, constantly moving. But the more I thought about it,
I realized that time is just something that is perceived.
But it doesn't really exist. So, if it doesn't really exist, wouldn't it be possible to travel and move through time?
When I was 8, I asked my parents to invest in the future and
buy me a time travel certificate. It was from a company that said in 500 years, when time travel was possible,
it would come back to some point in your life
and bring you to the future.
So there's a little bit of that. So those 3 projects are the ones in which I was kind of pulling this data together and using it to create a narrative. I think when I first sort of started coming to these meetings, I think I thought, like Michael had mentioned at the beginning of his talk last time, that, I don't really make work like that. And then I noticed, like, each meeting, like, someone was presenting, and I was really enjoying what everybody was doing. And then I started thinking, like, I guess maybe I also do that. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation here.
Can I just hop in with a question? I don't know the format of
I didn't really have a format. I've just been putting my own notes in this Google Doc, so shoot.
Okay, our social contract. I too was social media averse at first. I don't know if people remember what MySpace was, but that was like the first one I became involved with. And I did see it also as this platform for creative projects. It was just kind of like this thing that I'd never seen before, just connecting with all sorts of people and strangers. Did something similar to your like identity project, using other people to try to construct your identity, where I was doing portraits of other mics on MySpace. It was just like painting portraits, and people also, I don't know if you remember, you could put in like a little phrase or slogan or something that encapsulated your personality. So it was kind of like the text and the image. So I thought if I amassed enough of these mics with their sayings, that would kind of build a self-portrait. But what I loved about the Brian Wilson project is how the Brian Wilson started becoming part of the creative process. And that would just like, it completely opened it up for me. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like the designers and the writers and the filmmakers, and it was just so next level. I was definitely loving that, how it kind of like the fourth wall, I guess, if there's something like that in art, kind of gets switched or broken. There's been a very few times where my projects have kind of gone that, kind of extra step, and just magic starts to happen there, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for your comments. Yeah, and it wasn't, I had no idea what would happen. Like, I had no idea, that I would sort of get attached to some of these stories and some of these people. And then when the idea came, why not? Why not open it up and involve them? If they're willing to go to my weird website and fill out the survey, maybe they want to be part of the project.
Yeah, there's so much this myth of like the artist is this genius in their studio working on something, all alone and creating something amazing for the world. But I do like when it's like, bring people in that are kind of starting to resonate, with what you're doing, and then you could come up with something bigger and better you can't think of singly.
Yeah.
I had a question too about, I hope I didn't miss it, but like, I kept thinking about why, because it feels like the first project that was in this grouping of works that you presented felt like it was an interesting grief ritual that wanted to talk about interconnectedness and has like this nice existential feeling with stars. But then instead of things being about how we all died, it seemed like you shifted into this thing about, well, what do we do if we're alive? Let's go find all these people who have like even a spiritual-ish description of what they do with their time. But I didn't get a sense of like, wait, how did you get into this form of either work or even making websites? Because it feels like there's one thing that I'm curious about your own narrative in impetus.
So I think in doing the From Far Away Across the Universe about my friend and going to the concert, one of the things that really interested me is trying to get people to give that specific story that would be something that would help one understand the identity of who he was. And those stories, like the person that I sent to the concert did not know him at all and was not familiar with the band. Like, she was just coming in just totally, blank slate. And it was interesting to hear, how people would describe him, or the stories that they would tell, that if you didn't know anything about him, were you really gaining and understanding who he was as an individual? So that sort of exploration into individuality through that project is what pushed me to the next couple, the Polyphonic Spree one, and then the Brian Wilson, that this idea of the individual of him, kind of spawned that thought.
I feel like I still want to know more about your own like self of like, how does that curiosity form?
Well,
are your other works like this?
The I mean, individuality and like sort of one's purpose and sort of are just, you know, our existence in the wider universe are the two main themes that go through my work. And for me, I have this incredibly unique name. And, you know, for me, it's definitely a big part of my identity that, you know, I know almost every person I come in contact with will think to themselves, I don't know anybody named this. So it was really interesting to me to think about, you know, how does somebody deal with identity that has a name that they share with thousands of people and with somebody, you know, a couple people who are really famous. So that's what kind of led me to that exploration.
It's funny because I have there's a bunch of people with my name as well in both in Canada and France, and I remember the first time I noticed is because there was like a character animator named Nicolas Grenier, and I googled my name and I found some like somewhat dubious animations with my name, and because it was like some visual stuff that popped up, I was just like kind of annoyed. I was just like, oh, I wish we're kind of better. and um, and then there was like this football player, also locally named Nicolas Grenier. And then I discovered there was a poet in France who won a bunch of prizes. So then when we Googled, a lot of the times during a few years, it was like Nicolas Grenier, the poet, who popped up first. And then there was like this doctor in France, and then this interior architect in France as well. And then it's funny because regularly I'd receive emails addressed to some other guy, like for especially like architecture stuff. Since I do architectural installation, sometimes there's like confusion and people think that I'm the Parisian interior designer or something. So when I saw this room with all the Nicolas Greniers, like all the Brian Wilson, sorry, talking, I imagined a room with like just where I could meet those other guys with my name and just like see what would happen. Anyway, so it was like a very interesting video. I really love it. It's like it just made me feel the potential of doing something with my own name.
That's great.
I mean, also it'd be funny to discover, like, are these people cool? Like, are some of them assholes? Like, it's just, there's all those questions, right? That like
Yeah.
you have this kind of weird intimacy just because of the randomness of your name. Anyway, whatever. It raises a lot of questions for me.
Yeah, definitely, because, you know, people know you and they know your name, so you're them to you know, your friends and family. But there's other people that have a different vision of who your name is, not you, which is just crazy.
And also,
And
I
it's
think
interesting to, oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say, like in a data-driven world today, it's like weird the power that, you know, the name has. Because, like, for example, a friend of mine 2 days ago was telling me that his, like, somebody with his name got like published on social media for having like I think raped someone or something. It was like and then like everybody he knew thought it was him. And basically, like, his name was mud online. It's like no matter what he did, it didn't matter. It's like anyone will Google him and think it's him because it was like close enough in terms of geographic location, if I remember correctly. So there's all those weird things where you think like the name is something that like maybe like 200 years ago it didn't really matter, but like, or even maybe 50 years ago, maybe even 25 years ago, I don't know. But now it's like this weird, bizarre data thing as well. Yeah.
I was just going to say that it's interesting to think about how much a name can potentially influence who you are or who you become, because it's almost like a wish from the people who, your parents, presumably, who gave you the name for your future, because, you know, there's a lot of thought put into giving some person a name, and in a lot of cultures, it's really significant what the name means.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that I think I asked a number of the Brian Wilsons about was like, did your parents know about Brian Wilson, the Beach Boy? Or, and, you know, some of them were older, so, you know, they had the name before, but the younger ones, a lot of them would just say, oh, I don't know, like they never mentioned anything. Like, I mean, wouldn't you, I would think twice before, if my last name was Wilson, before naming my child Brian, but.
I think it's interesting how in a lot of your projects, or at least the ones you showed us today, you're dealing with music in some way, and music is one thing that a lot of people use to identify with another group, or like you self-affiliate as a fan of a certain band or a performer, and it becomes part of your identity, and it's like a marker for yourself to take on, so that it gives you some sort of a cachet, or identifies you as a certain kind of a person as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, music is and has been a big element of my work for some time.
I wonder if you've thought about, because like in hearing all, I have to I got a record deal last month, and so I'm having to like solidify things. Thank you. And I had to pick a name, and I because it's my first like solo album, and I've never released music under my name before. I've released it under something else. So we had to pick a name, and we had to pick like, so do I use my last name? Do I not use my last name? Oh, Berkowitz is kind of clumsy. Do people want to say Berkowitz when they like, it was a whole thing. And I just wonder if, and so we settled on Christy, just Christy, like Prince, why not? And and so I wonder if you've thought about like the fact that while Brian Wilson is Brian Wilson, like so many of these people are not. Like I'm Catherine Christina Roberts is my government name, you know? And like, no, and my parents still wanted me to be a senator with that name, clearly, right? Like Catherine, it's like, ugh. And here I am, and I'm not going by like any, and I've been called Christy my whole life. And so I wonder if you've ever thought about like even further to like how musicians have to like pick a name, because that's been a whole, like I've had to have I've had to have focus groups meetings about this, about what to call me. Like, and so it's a whole, yeah, like I think even that, like even taking it further to like how,
I mean, I'm sure I think there's about 5,500 people in the world that have the name Brian Wilson, and I'm sure one of them's got to be a musician, right?
yeah,
you know, based on that number. And you know, it seems like maybe the worst thing in the world, but maybe the best thing in the world at the same time, because maybe people can, you know, go with it and confuse you for Brian Wilson, and or maybe, you know, you have to change who you are. You have to change your identity so that you can be you.
yeah. There's my old music is under Glitzer, and there's another, and there was no other Glitzers at the time, and now there's another Glitzer, and they signed up wrong under Spotify, and so I actually get their royalties sometimes.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
I'm really interested in, as you're talking about identity, how you're also exploring the issue of legibility in identity, and which spaces are more or less legible for different identities. I'll use my own experience. My last name is a spelling minefield, but in other places it's legible in a different way. So my entire life I've grown up spelling my name, just assuming the middle, that's where it gets bad. And then when I studied in grad school, they said, please stop spelling your name, it's phonetic. Oh, no, it's not. It's not phonetic, but you just know how to spell it because of the sound pattern. So seeing legibility in different temporal places, but also as you're kind of pulling time in different ways, so just that like space, culture, time, just those different building blocks. And I think it's also interesting the kind of time period in which you're making some of these around that early emergence of social media, and what a rich place for playing with identity that became for artists, but not for our own identities, but to play with other people's identities.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love it. That's really fun and fascinating.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I can say the only thing I like about social media is that you can reach people that you don't even know exist in the world. And it served me well in a couple of the projects that I was doing, that there's no way I could have done it without social media, because it would just take forever. Like, am I just like sending random letters to towns, addressing it Brian Wilson to try to find these people? So it made it possible, which was really intriguing, and makes me forget some of the things I hate about social media.
My husband actually got a letter. He has an unusual last name, Melstead, and there are only a handful of people around the world who have that last name, because he's half Icelandic. And so in Icelandic culture, you take it, the last names are patronymic. So you take your father's first name and then add son or daughter to it. Mm-hmm. But then his family, when they emigrated to North America, like 100 years ago or whenever, they just kind of set their last name as Melstead. And then he got a letter from another Melstead saying, hey, are you one of our Melsteads? And this was like maybe 15 or even 20 years ago. So it's interesting that you mentioned, would I just email or would I mail people letters? And this person tried to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know how successful she was in gathering all the Melsteads.
That you mentioned the Icelandic. So one of the projects you guys didn't see was a project called The Symphony of Names, No Man is an Island, where I went to Iceland and I worked with an Icelandic composer. And it's a 4-channel video with a 10-channel audio. And in the audio, we hear all 4,200 and 80 names that are on the Icelandic naming list. Since you mentioned everything ends with son or daughter, and is using the parents' first name. So this Icelandic name list is like their names, and they don't have that same identity that other cultures do with the last name, because their last names don't follow, from generation to generation. That's interesting. I haven't heard of somebody from Iceland dropping that part of it. That's intriguing.
Apparently it's been more common in recent years. Like people even who are in Iceland will just pick a last name and stick with it.
I know that Jews in the Pale of Settlement only started having last names when a law was passed that they had to take last names so that they could be sued. And that's what I've heard in my research. And so like there's a lot of like Berkowitz just means son of the bear. And there's other names that are like, I'm the man of that lake over there. And that's kind of, so a lot of Ashkenazi Jewish names that come from the Pale of the Settlement are like maybe only less than 200 years old.
Yeah, I keep thinking about names as almost like IP addresses, like the ways that you can find someone or someone wants to be found. But then I was thinking that if you were to never take on a name, like you're describing as a last name, you really mess with a lot of the law, as opposed to just not being able to be found. Because if someone knows where you generally reside, they can find you, but that's a different way of locating than, say, the law.
I kind of had a question that's like off the name topic, but you had these kind of like amazingly realized like movies almost at the end of these projects, and it felt like such like a long walk from, I'm just going to put this questionnaire out to see if there's other Brian Wilsons on the internet. Like, do you have kind of like this end project in mind when you're going into it, or does it just kind of like build and snowball, and you just see where it goes and you end up with a feature film?
I mean, that's a good question. Like I've learned over the years that I do like projects in which I do not know exactly where it's going to go. And I had thought of this Brian Wilson project years before I finally launched that website. And I just couldn't figure out, like, I was like, oh, I want to do something about this name and like individuality. And I couldn't figure out just how to get it off the ground. So then I was like, you know what, I'm just going to build a website. Maybe people will go to it. And then because I didn't know, what would happen, like, would anybody fill out that survey? Like, would I get any information from this? I really didn't know where it would go. But, since I was gathering, text and stories and things, it lended itself well to creating this narrative. And my background is in photography and film. So, it made sense to me to take it in that direction and kind of create this new narrative with some of this information and sort of shape it into something that, hopefully express this idea about identity in a more sort of concise way. But yeah, that one I had no clue where it was going. But collective distance I did, because I had to propose. There was a very short time frame. It was like a 3-month time frame for that residency project. So I had to propose to them what I was going to do. And I think, because I had done the real Brian Wilson, I'd seen like, oh, well, I could do that, collect some information and come up with some narrative. So that one I did know was going to be a film. And I did know, some of the places I was going to film and shoot, because I wanted it to be in that road movie genre. And I wanted it to give the viewer this sort of expansive view of something that they couldn't experience at that moment, which was like traveling somewhere and going somewhere. So I ended up shooting that film. I drove in 2020, in summer 2020, I drove out to the Salt Desert there in Utah and filmed a bunch of it, and then shot some in Death Valley. And the film actually starts with a shot of Gibraltar, because right when the pandemic was hitting in the beginning of March 2020, I was in Spain. I was in Spain for an exhibition that I just put up, and my plan had been, I was really curious about Gibraltar. I really wanted to see Gibraltar. So I had traveled 8 hours from Madrid to go to Gibraltar. I did that filming. I had no idea what I was going to be using that for, but I thought, I just wanted to see it. And then all of a sudden, then the world closed down and I had to quickly get on a flight back to the United States. So it felt like a nice piece of imagery to include in that project.
And do you consider it all one project, or is like, do you separate it in your mind with like, this is the research for like what ends up becoming the film? Like, because the websites are just like so well designed, and like the UX, and they're kind of projects in and of themselves. But I don't know if that's just kind of like your beta testing. You've got like a half a dozen websites out there to see which one has legs that you can turn into a bigger project.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't mind, sharing and showing all of the pieces that kind of make the final product. of the project. And that's why, you know, I did include part of the website was included in the Real Brian Wilson show, because I thought it was important for people to understand that, you know, there was just this, you know, very ambiguous website that was created that these people went to and filled out this information. And that's some of what we're experiencing. So in looking back at my projects and kind of seeing how I put them together, you know, I do always feel like, oh, I should like put together like a publication that shows some of these pieces, because some of them you really don't get to experience, or you don't know as a viewer that are there. And I think that they are important. I just, I think in some senses I've sort of struggled with, okay, when I show Collective Distance, the 9-minute video, should I show the website right next to it and things like that. So I'm kind of experimenting, I guess.
I like the idea if you ask for if there's any like Brian Wilsons that are managers, or like continually finding ways to help yourself finish a project that somehow someone might already be invested in because they have that name. But I was also curious, like, do you feel like you've got anything interesting that philosophically you, I don't know if the word is discovered through making work, but I'm just curious on your take about individuality and its relationship to identity, because I feel like a lot of people aren't just now talking about individuality as like, it's a bane of our existence in the same way of capitalism, or there's just a spiritual take on it of, if you feel interconnected with people, then that's another way of feeling alive, and maybe you don't die if you really feel that interconnected. But I'm curious about what you feel like you've kind of stumbled on.
I mean, in all the work projects, I feel like I've learned something for sure. You know, I enjoyed the fact that people participated in the first project that I did, From Far Away Across the Universe, and they did submit the audio stories, and they did buy into, you know, this crazy thought that, you know, somebody can go experience something for somebody who's passed away. And, you know, the family participated in it, which was nice. Like, I didn't know them before that. Like, I knew my friend, and, you know, I knew he had a brother and a sister, and I knew his father was a doctor. Like, I knew things about them. I just had never met them before. And, you know, I think a lot of people might have had a hard time launching that project, you know, feeling like, you know, oh, when someone dies, you don't really know how to talk to people who are close to them. You know, you feel like maybe I shouldn't bring it up. And I think for me, you know, death was like a big part of growing up as a child, because my sister passed away, that it's never difficult for me to talk to somebody who's lost somebody. So, you know, I quickly entered in a conversation with the family, and I was totally fine with, if they didn't want to participate, that's fine. And I didn't want to offend them. I told them before I launched it what I wanted to do, just because I wanted to be sensitive. And they were just like, oh, that's great. Like, we love this idea. We'll, you know, send it on to people that we don't know. And, you know, I think in kind of learning, you know, hearing stories about this friend of mine from people that I didn't know, you know, I hear those aspects of him in there. So it was, you know, nice to sort of gather those stories and feel like they were, you know, at least in my perception of who he was, a good representation. I think individuality, when I went into the Real Brian Wilson, I didn't know that I was going to interact with any of the Brian Wilsons. And it sounded kind of easier than it was probably in my explanation, but it was literally the hardest project I've ever worked on. You know, when I entered this kind of partnership with the writer, Brian Wilson, you know, things went really well. And then all of a sudden, he like totally vanished. Like, I was planning, because part of the film was set in Northern Ireland. So I was, you know, I had put all of these arrangements in to go to Northern Ireland to do part of the filming there, because I wanted to represent that part of the story. And you know, him as the individual that he is, you know, decided he needed to vanish for a few months. And I was in this position where it was like, oh, I've written this thing with this guy named Brian Wilson, and now I have to finish it. And I want to feel like, you know, it's fair in how I'm finishing it, that I'm not like making up something or changing his part of the vision, but he doesn't want to talk to me right now. So it's like, okay, well, I have to go with, you know, something in his personality got overwhelmed, and now I have to figure out how to complete it. He did come back, you know, into the project as I was working on finishing it, but it was literally like just one of the hardest things I had to do, because it's like you put your faith, I'm so invested in the project, and then you know, this one of the people that you're working the most closely with just completely disappears. But since the project was so much about individuality, I had to go with it. And actually part of the narrative kind of alludes to that too. So it did shape and form with these things that happened, which was interesting. But none of that, no, people wouldn't necessarily know, you know, looking at what I've presented about it. Actually, it is a little bit in the narrative, because in the film's 23 minutes, the 2-channel video, and part of it we do actually hear the writer. We hear a voiceover of me talking to the writer, and so you actually do get a slight glimpse of that in there.
If you don't mind, do you have like a public link that
I don't. I have a private link, which I certainly can send anyone who wants to watch The Real Brian Wilson in its entirety.
I feel like I should do an outro. Does anyone also have any last comments or questions? Otherwise, I was gonna say, if anyone wants to present anyone with stuff that they've got coming up that they want to share, we should do that and then maybe wrap up.
Just thanks for presenting, and thanks for hosting Cedric this time. That was fun.
Yeah, Elizabeth, thank you. I, as a musician, and somebody who like kind of, some of my work is kind of inspired by music. I really appreciate when work about music is like deep and moving without being like overly sentimental. So, and because I feel like it's so easy for us to make sentimental work about music. And so I really appreciate the kind of more nuanced areas of your work a lot. So thank you.
Thanks.
I'm sorry about my allergies. I can go next. I know I said this last time and then I didn't sign up on the thing. But I can go next time.
Chrissy, do you want to go next time? We're in July.
Oh, because you guys are going next time. I'm so
We can go, we can switch it though if you're like feeling really like lit. We're flexible.
No. I'll go in July. July is fine.
So is the next one like June 18th?
I think that sounds right. Yeah.
And then the following one looks like July 16th?
Yeah, I can do that.